This is the second class in Perek Hamafkid, which is a Masechtas Bava Metzia on Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Beis. Let's begin with a general outline of this class. The Mishnah taught both about a case where a person deposited an animal and about a case where a person deposited utensils by his fellow. The Mishnah taught that in either of these cases, whether a person deposited an animal by his fellow or if he deposited kalim, utensils by his fellow, if one of these two were stolen and the shomer says, I'm choosing to pay rather than swear, then if and when the ganav is later found and he's obligated to pay either kefil or 4 or 5 times the amount, that payment will be given to the shomer. We're not going to say one payment is given to the shomer and the extra amount, the double or the 4 and 5 times the amount, the extra, goes to the owner. So the Mishnah teaches us that in both of these cases, whether he gives him an animal or kalim to watch over, the shomer chinam is entitled to all the payments that are given by the ganav if he chooses to pay instead of swear. And the Gemara is going to do one thing, and that is the Gemara will ask why the Mishnah needs to teach the din both by a case where an animal was deposited and a case where utensils were deposited. The Gemara is going to ask, why do we have to teach it in both cases? It should have just said if an animal was deposited or if kalim, utensils, were deposited. And it would seem that we would learn that if it applies by an animal, it applies by kalim. If it applies by kalim, it applies by an animal. Why does the Mishnah need to teach both? And the Gemara is going to answer the question. So let's see the Gemara now in the flowchart form. The Mishnah taught that in a case where a person deposited an animal or utensils by his fellow and they were later stolen, if the shomer chinam chooses to pay instead of taking an oath, then if the ganav is found, he'll be chayav to pay the kefil or the dalet and hay to the shomer chinam. In other words, the owner is giving the rights of the kefil or the dalet and hay. He's giving it over to the shomer chinam. He's not saying it was stolen from me, it was my object. I have the rights to any additional amount that's paid by the ganav. The ganav stole my object. He stole my property. He's supposed to pay me. So one time the amount needs to go to the shomer because he paid for it. But beyond that, it has to be paid to the owner. The Mishnah tells us that the owner is giving the rights over to the shomer. So ask the Gemara, why does the Mishnah need to teach the din by a case where an animal was deposited? And why does the Mishnah need to teach the din by a case where utensils were deposited? Why does it need to teach the din by both cases? Let it just teach it by one, and we know that it applies in all cases. And the Gemara answers, tzricha or tzrichi, we need it. We need both cases to be taught to us, because if we're only taught one, we'd say it only applies there, not by the other. And the Gemara explains, if it said the case of an animal, we would say that only by an animal does the owner give over the kefil. Specifically by the animal does the owner say that if the ganav is found, if you choose to pay me, if the ganav is found, I will give you the rights to kefil. Why only by an animal? Because the shomer chinam has to work hard to bring it in and take it out. An animal needs to be taken care of, it needs to be brought in, it needs to be taken out, and therefore the owner is telling the shomer that by an animal, since you're putting in extra work to take care of it, I'm going to give over to you the kefil if you decide to pay. And later on the ganav is found, you'll get the kefil. But by utensils, by kalim, where there isn't much work involved, then the owner doesn't give over the kefil. When it comes to kalim, I would say the owner says, listen, if you decide to pay me, then if the ganav is found, he'll have to pay you that amount that you paid me. But the extra amount, the kefil, should be paid to me, says the owner, because the item belongs to me, it was stolen from me, I'm entitled to the kefil. That's what we would say. And therefore the Mishnah needs to teach us that not only by an animal does the owner give over the kefil to the shomer, but even by kalim does the owner give over the kefil to the shomer. Now, why can't we just say kalim? So the Gemara explains. But before we move on, we'll just show it in a chart. So we have an animal versus kalim. What's the difference? By an animal, it's more work. Therefore, it's green. He's permitting him to get the kefil. However, by kalim, where it's less work, it's red because he's not giving over the kefil. And how about the other way around? Just say kalim. So the Gemara explains, if it said the case of utensils, of kalim, we would say that only by utensils does the owner give over the kefil. By utensils, the owner says, I'm willing that if you pay me, and later on the ganav is found, I'll give you the kefil, but not by an animal. What's the explanation? Because the kefil is never extended to more. Kefil is always kefil. For kalim that are stolen, a ganav will never pay more than double. So therefore the owner is willing to give over because it's not such a greater amount of money. It's just double the original item. But by animals, where the kefil is sometimes extended to more, we take that kefil, the concept of kefil, and we make it even greater. We make it to be 4 or 5 times the amount, if it was a sheep or ox that were slaughtered or sold. So then the owner doesn't give over the kefil. The owner doesn't want to give over such a large thing. So we'd say by kalim, the owner says, if you pay me, when it was stolen, you choose to pay instead of swear, I'll give over to you whatever payments the ganav has to give over. the ganav needs to pay, which is kefil. I'll give that to you. But by an animal, there maybe we're going to say that the owner's not willing to give over those rights because they could sometimes be significantly greater. It could be 4 or 5 times the amount. So let's show that in the chart. By an animal, it's more costly for the owner. He's giving over a lot more. So then he's not going to give it over to the shamer. And Kalim, where it's less costly, he will give it over. And being that each one has a reason to say that by it the owner is willing to give it over, but not by the other. Therefore, concludes the Gemara, therefore they're both needed. So to summarize, we just asked, why does the Mishnah teach the din that the owner is willing to give over the rights to kefil? If the Shemer Chinim chooses to pay, he says, I'm willing to give over to you the rights to collect whatever the Ganav needs to pay. Why do we need to say it both by animals and by Kalim? We explained, because each one has a special reason by it to say that it's specifically there that the owner gives over the rights and not by the other case, and therefore we need to teach both cases.